All right, boys and girls, welcome back. Thank you for joining us here. Second segment together with Jon Bjerknes. We are talking about KGB, Russia, communism, its rise in the West by having many of the Western leaders being in support of people like Putin. It's a very interesting perspective, and I hope that you out there understand kind of the warning, I guess, that Christopher is coming with here. We're going to try to pick this apart a bit more here in the second segment. And of course, agree or not, I think it's very important to listen to this and just make sure that we just don't walk straight into something, a trap, which has been set up for us. But talk to us a bit, Christopher, about the issue that KGB is still alive and well, right? Most people today, if you talk about the official world, know that they collapsed. It's all over. That's not an issue anymore. It's much more open now. What's the proof that KGB is still there and operating under FSB?
In my book, I quote Putin, who says that there is no such thing as a former KGB agent. The proof that KGB is alive and well is that Putin tends to select his leadership from among KGB agents, including the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, Kirill. And he allows them in his kleptocracy to enrich themselves. Now, the Russian Orthodox Church had been commandeered, at least since the time of Stalin, to be used as part of the state apparatus to control and manipulate the population. And Kirill is a very good example of that in the modern age, and was a KGB agent and is now a multi-billionaire under Putin. Also, you'll see that in foreign countries, there are KGB men who run those nations and are entrenched in all of the corruption of those nations. The KGB is a very, very corrupt organization, just as Lenin and Trotsky were very corrupt and stole Russian art treasures and the gold of Russia and shipped it out of the country to the Jewish bankers who had put them in power.
So there's no vestiges of the old Russia left within the political system of those who rule and those who are on the inside of politics. There's nothing of that left.
What has taken the place of that is this Russian-Israeli alliance, which is being conducted by Chabad Lubavitch.
Right.
And one of the reasons that Putin got rid of a handful of Jewish oligarchs was to consolidate the power of Chabad Lubavitch and to make that man, Beryl Lazar, chief rabbi of Russia, in opposition to the Jewish oligarch Guzinski, who had other Jewish connections. Now, Chabad Lubavitch is a specifically messianic branch of Judaism, and they believe that the seventh Rebbe, Mendel Menachem Schneerson, is the Messiah of the Jews.
So these are the guys in control of Putin, ultimately.
Absolutely. Not just Putin, control of the world.
So their objective,
and
again,
not for good ends.
Right. So their objective, again, through Putin, through the dynamic that you've been talking about, is to play both sides, but basically have in your opinion, an undercurrent within the West, which seems to be a grassroots movements rise up, being support of Putin and the activities that he's involved in, ultimately these guys.
Yes, and also Alan Dershowitz wrote a book, I believe in 1997, and he quoted the first Rebbe, Shneur Zalman, who said that he would support the Tsar and not support Napoleon, because if he supported Napoleon, Jews would be emancipated and they would become wealthy. But if he supported the Tsar, then the Tsar would inspire anti-Semitism, which would keep the Jews segregated, and the Jews would keep their soul. And Chabad is playing that same game between East and West. They are now trying to gin up anti-Semitism in the West so that common Jews feel uncomfortable in the West and turn to Russia. Now, you mentioned the emigration of Jews out of the Soviet Union, and I have a long section about that in my book, detailing the numbers and the dates. Putin has now called for the Jews to return to Russia.
I saw that, yeah.
And Brendan O'Connell has a terrific insight into the fact that Putin has established organizations in Israel, which the Israeli news and the Mossad are against, which are calling for Jews who have knowledge of the high-tech sector to return to Russia so that the Russians can then garner all the military intelligence that the U.S. has provided to Israel. And I don't think you even have to go that far, because there is a history of Israel providing the Soviet Union and providing Red China with our military technology.
Yeah,
there was a huge scandal in 2013, and Obama, the communist, did nothing about it.
Yeah, I mean, Israel is already deeply embedded into the American military system, specifically, high-tech stuff and
Trump has said that,
go ahead.
Trump has said that we ought to share more of our intelligence with our allies. And he has shared top secret information with Russia and with Israel. And whatever goes to Israel, Israel then has the opportunity, should they so choose, to forward to Russia. But it does not appear that we ever get anything about Russia from Israel or about Red China from Israel. The river flows the other way.
Yeah, exactly. That's an interesting point. So, I mean, obviously, it seems to me then that the conflicts in Europe, I mean, talk to us how you see this dynamic and situation. But, I mean, at some point, due to the immigration, due to the mass migration, due to the terrorism that we're seeing in the West right now, do you think that we would ever get to a point where European armies and everything would go together to basically just fight? I mean, they are fighting a war in the Middle East, but I'm saying even more, an expansion of them saying, you know what, we got to put an end to these Islamic countries. We can't deal with this anymore. Let's go to the source. Let's war. Let's take them out. Effectively manifesting this greater Israel and ensuring the region for them. Is that a possibility?
It's not only a possibility, it's been stated objective. And I was just going to mention the fact that Trump has called for NATO, which he declared as obsolete in its mission to defend Europe against Russia, to alter course and become an anti-Islamic force. And another interesting thing that has happened in recent times is that Jens Stoltenberg has become the head of NATO, and he was active with the KGB and had a KGB code name. And his sister was a Marxist, and he was a Marxist terrorist in Norway.
He was in Denmark, actually. And he was actually caught being like dressing up in women's clothing and stuff like that, like coming home late night from parties. I think they have something on that guy. I think that he's basically just being blackmailed to do the bidding of these people. He seems like a very odd character, actually, Stoltenberg.
My information on him was that he was throwing bombs at an embassy or something as part of a Marxist terrorist thing. I don't know anything about the cross-dressing, yeah. But they do like to have people that they have something on.
Yeah.
And that was another thing where Putin's terrorism came in, is when they Christopher Steele compiled the dossier on Trump, he had an insider in the Russian government who turned up dead when that dossier became public, and he was found in the back seat of his car.
Who was that again? What was the name of that guy?
Oh, his name escapes me at the moment.
All right.
But let me look in my book. I can find Christopher Steele, and it should be close to that.
Yeah, and while you look for that, because I remember that dossier as well, and there was even, there was that issue that...
Oleg Arovkin.
Okay.
Or Arovinkin.
All right, see if I can find something on him.
Former KGB and FSB general who turned up dead.
And when was this again?
This was on December 26, 2016. His body was found in the backseat of his car. The FSB, if I remember right, confiscated his body and brought it to the FSB morgue.
So 8 Russian diplomats have died suddenly since election day. Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Let me go back to the dossier a little bit you mentioned as well, because I feel that there's deflections obviously within this issue because many of them have been dead ends, right? That the mainstream accusations, some of them have not gone very far, and I've always felt that if there's nothing to it, people will be able to figure that out very quickly and say, well, listen, there's nothing to this. These Russia conspiracies are just crazy. They're just made up because there's no hard evidence at the end of that. But what I'm saying is that what if they're giving us then basically a phony version of all this? The dossier, I remember back, there was initially information had been linked to BuzzFeed News, and they decided to publish it. There was wasn't this with the accusations that Trump had rented a hotel room in Russia to pee on the bed or something like that? I mean, there was these outrageous, ridiculous...
With prostitutes to have golden showers.
Yeah.
But I think what's happening is that what you're describing does not show that there is no basis for these accusations. What happens in the press is that they exaggerate things, and then the exaggerations are taken to dismiss the entirety of what is being accused. And then people say, well, there's nothing to it. Just because the exaggerations aren't true doesn't mean that there's nothing to it. If somebody shot someone and somebody tells a tall tale that he shot him with a 12-gauge shotgun when in fact he shot him with a 22 long rifle, the guy was still shot, even though the story had been embellished and the embellishment was false. Yeah.
So do you think that the mainstream are sincere in their intentions to try to figure this out, or are they part of the deflection to bring out some of this nonsense to get people who are a little bit more intelligent, first level, and just say, what is this? There's nothing here. It's just a lot of, smoke, right?
I think if you watch it closely, you'll see that there are crescendos that build in these stories, and then they pull back and they appear almost to support Trump, especially when he does something that benefits Israel. And what this does psychologically to the American people is confuse us to the point where we cannot rationally discern what is true and what is not true. And it is part of the KGB program to demoralize and destabilize America and the West to the point where we don't have the means of discerning what is true. And all of our institutions have broken down to the point where we no longer have faith in government or media. And I think the media is imploding on itself on purpose.
That's interesting. Yeah, because then that would explain potentially. I remember I was arguing with another guest a while back where they talked about, Trump is in on it. He's, the guy they wanted and all that stuff. And my point was, well, it would have been awfully big risk of the mainstream media to put themselves in such vehement opposition to Trump, because this obviously have helped to discredit them, right? It helped for a lot of Americans to say, the mainstream media are lying. They're just making stuff up. They don't make even sense anymore. Like this latest CNN debacle where these 3 people were walking away, or they were fired from CNN because they were just making up a story and they were just lying about stuff, right? So people looking at this and they just say, there's nothing behind this. But
and then who takes over the narrative? The narrative is then taken over by the quote unquote conspiracy theorist alternative media, anti-Zionist media generally, that forwards the Russian agenda of pushing a wedge between America and Israel and towards Russia, because their message is Jews in the West bad, Russia good.
Right.
Now, Putin says,
and it's not that simple.
Putin says, if the West is being bad to you Jews, come to me. So an alliance is being formed between Russia, Israel, and world Jewry. And it's an artifice, because these people are acting against our own internal best interests in favor of our enemy's best interests.
Basically, again, I know we're going over this, but communism is a mechanism, a vehicle, a tool to control large populations. What communism did to Russia is something that it can, and if it could, will do to Europe and America again, correct?
Absolutely. And who invited Russia into all of Eastern Europe? The Nazis. The Nazis imploded on themselves, and that is when Malta occurred, and the communists took over all of Eastern Europe, which they did not have prior to the war. And I think that they are trying to set up something similar, where Putin can create fascists so that he can oppose fascists and use them as a pretext to invade Europe, the way that he has created Chechen terrorism and ISIS to use as a pretext to invade other nations and occupy them. Communism fulfills the Jewish messianic prophecy that the Jews will rule the world and take over every government.
And when you say communism, you mean internationalism, basically a world government, right?
I mean a system of political thought that is engineered by Jews to fulfill Jewish messianic prophecy, whereby they destroy the best of the Gentiles, the bourgeoisie class, the intelligentsia, and they diminish the genetics, especially of the white race, through miscegenation with other races and by killing off the intellectual class and destroying any sense of national cohesion and national heritage. And that was one of the reasons they went after the monarchy, because the monarchy is a patriarchal figure, and that promotes both racial and national cohesion. And the prophecies, the messianic prophecies of the Jews, call for the destruction of all that. So communism is part of the twin horns of Jewish messianic prophecy, whereby they take over all Gentile governments, destroy the inherent racial characteristics of every non-Jewish people, while calling out the Jews in the Zionist mission to ingather in Israel and fulfill the Jewish messianic prophecy that they will rule the world from Jerusalem. So those two forces, which are always controlled and which are always engineered by Jews, fulfill Jewish messianic prophecy. So communism is Judaism for Gentiles, and Zionism is Judaism for Jews. And Zionism is nationalistic, and communism is international, as you said.
Yeah, it's an important point. I mean, I think the scenario that I've always been worried about is that with the understandable rise in opposition in Europe to the ongoing destruction of our societies, the corruption of it, the immigration, the complete it's falling apart right now in front of our eyes, that the organized interests of true and genuine people would be something that the international community can use as a pretext, as an excuse to, as you say, invade these countries to take care of the, quote, fascist problem in these countries. I mean, that's a real and very viable, scenario what could play out. But at the same time, they will call anyone fascist who they don't agree with, as you've pointed out already. But that also implies a position where we can't kind of do anything, or whatever we would do, they would just see the same pretext, and the end result would always be the same. Is there any proposed idea? I disagree. Okay, go ahead. Tell us what you would do.
I think what we're failing to do by continually reacting to what the Jews are doing is instigate our own movements. And that is why I'm so suspicious that all this money is being directed towards people who promote Putin as if our savior. Because by looking to our enemy as being our savior, we attain a certain comfort level that enables us to not do the hard work that is necessary to save ourselves. And I think that Trump and his contrived battle with the media and the media's contrived battle with Trump opens up a golden opportunity for us to point out who it is who truly is corrupting our society and who is trying to make saviors out of our enemies, both internal and external enemies.
You said hard.
And look at where they're directing our military forces. How dare Trump pit us against Islam when Israel is our greatest enemy, and we should be uniting with Islam to fight against Israel and Jewish corruption. And Putin is doing nothing to forward that agenda. He's grinding Syria into dust in collusion with the United States and Israel. Syria is not a wonderful place to be right now, and Putin is in control of Syria. So how can we say that he's being effective in helping the Muslims? And this benefits Putin. The war between the U.S., the tacit war between the U.S. and Syria and Iran, benefits Russia tremendously in keeping natural gas prices and oil prices high, and in consuming the West in these self-consuming wars for Israel. The ultimate target of these wars is not the Muslims, it's the white race. The golden age of the Jews was when they lived under Muslim rule in a Muslim-occupied Europe.
Yeah, no, that's true. Is there any Islamic leaders that would team up with European nations, Western nations at this stage?
The Islamic people have a mindset which is favorable to an anti-Jewish position. to a defense against Jewish position. So what the Jews do is they try to turn the Muslims against the West and the West against the Muslims. What we have to do is stop always reacting to the Jews and become proactive and try to build up some kind of an alliance. And that is one of the reasons that I hope that people investigate Putin's role in terrorism. Now, I am not trying to promote Muslim hordes invading Europe, quite the contrary. I am trying to form alliances whereby we are no longer destroying Islamic countries so that those people have no incentive to leave. And I think we should force them out of Europe and force them out of America. But we should do it in a fair way that recognizes that what we are doing is promoting the ethnic homogeneity of these ancient nations. We are not attacking Islam. We are following normal human tradition in maintaining the national sovereignty of our countries.
Yeah, that's a fair and accurate point, I'd say. I think that there's something, to that, to make sure that we can, the position I've always held is nationalism for everybody. But as we know, there is a clique of people that are stirring up trouble and making sure that people are pitted against people, make sure that we are fighting internally amongst ourselves. And I mean, if you think about it, all of these conflicts that we are involved in right now are completely unnecessary. There's none of them that has very few of them have come about in a natural way, if you will, over true, fight over territory or resources or anything like that.
And it's that absurdity that we have to ask who benefits from it. Israel benefits from it and Russia benefits from it. The West does not benefit from it. Quite the contrary. We are consuming ourselves and destroying ourselves fighting these wars and allowing these immigrants into our nation. And who is pushing for those immigrants? The EU, which was created by Coudenhove-Kalergi, who specifically stated that he wanted to breed out the white race. And who is promoting Kalergi's plan? Putin's friend, Angela Merkel. I don't believe those are coincidental events. And Gerhard Schroeder profited from his relationships with Putin and Gazprom and helped engineer the process by which Germany became dependent on Russian oil. And the reunification of Germany is part of the process of annihilating the German people. They have turned them into Soviets instead of the West absorbing Germany. They are now turning Germany against the West and against itself.
Talk to us a bit about the Russian people, the people on the ground, not the leadership, not those who are manipulating or pulling the strings. Where are they in all of this? Are they just pawns and a useless player, or is there any opposition within there for them to retake then their own country and get away with these manipulators and their establishment?
There is a long and involved history in that, which dates almost to the beginning of the Tsardom. The Tsars were taught that the Pope of Rome and Western countries represented the Antichrist, and that it was the duty of the Tsar to fight with the Jews against the West to fulfill Christian prophecy. And they thereby pitted Russia against the West, and that led to the Crimean Wars and all kinds of conflicts. But the Russian people had traditionally always considered themselves white and Western. And communism has changed that and now insists that Russians view themselves not as Russians, but as Eurasians. And they want all Europeans to view themselves as Eurasians. Now, there are billions of Chinese who fit in that Eurasian definition who can be marched straight into Europe and overwhelm Europe in a period of 5 years. And I suspect that's what Putin is up to. He's going to do what Stalin did. He's going to breed out the white race by transporting large populations of people to other countries and shuffling everyone around and opening up the borders to Eurasians and allowing in even more Chinese and Pakistanis and Indians into Europe.
Do you think that we can trust anything Putin say?
Oh, Putin's KGB, how can you trust what he says? Just because he says it doesn't make it false. But I don't view him as an honorable man, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
He may very well say things that are true. The devil can quote scripture in his favor.
Yeah, that is true. It's a very interesting dynamic because, again, it means we're just sandwiched between these different forces, and we're just, as usual, we're just pegged between all of this stuff, and it's very, very difficult for us, of course, to be in a position where we can see all the different layers of the players and try to, head in the right direction. But earlier said, do the hard work to save ourselves. What else would you, if you could pull the strings, if you could have your way of how people would go about the situation, what would you see people do to help dismantle the opposition that we're looking at?
We need a well-stated political agenda and a manifesto, as the National Socialists issued the 25 points. We need something similar to that. We need a symbol, we need a leader, and we need a political party. And we need to celebrate our national heritage, to start bearing more children and to educate them as to who and what they are, and that they have to defend themselves and honor themselves. One of the things that has terribly undermined us is this benevolence towards our enemies and hatred of ourselves. And we have to change that. And I think that America serves as a wonderful example, despite what the communists say, of what Western civilization can produce. It is the gem of Western civilization. Our Bill of Rights, the lands that we hold as our territory are beautiful and vast and give us tremendous strategic military advantages. And that's another thing that the communists are trying to undermine with their secessionist movements, is they're trying to balkanize America. So what we ought to do is celebrate ourselves, our national heritage, our common origins and defenses as Western civilization, so that when we hear this communist propaganda against us, we see it as an enemy attack instead of as a means of being cool and being in on the new movement that's going to save us.
If we look at the Frankfurt School, which of course planted a lot of these anti-Western seeds within our civilization, starting to see or the sprout, if you will, these seeds of doubt within ourselves. One of the quotes from Munzenberg was, "We will make the West so corrupt that it stinks." Right? It's the idea was, of course, to make.
They do that with homosexuality and all kinds of deviant behaviors that are meant to destabilize. Whereas Putin is in the process of normalizing communism in the Soviet Union, and in the process of normalization, all of the categories that were pitted against each other to create the process of destabilization are eliminated. And all those people who were pushing homosexual agendas, interracial agendas, anti-religious agendas, hatred of your national heritage in favor of internationalism, all of those get taken out. And then the process of normalization is undertaken, whereby the communists who are now in the seat of power want the nation to be functional and normal and to behave in a normal way so that the counter-revolution can gain no foothold with which to attack the revolutionaries. We have to normalize before we enter a crisis, is what I'm getting at. We have to normalize our society. We have to establish that our traditions were survival prone, and that now that we have abandoned our traditions, we are vulnerable to attack and are dying out. So we have to reestablish our traditions, sanctify our traditions, embrace our traditions, promote them and teach them to our youth. And we have to have that youth. We have to increase our birth rate.
Yeah, because right now, of course, no one has that faith. They don't believe in anything. They've given up on it. They want to see it fall, almost, in a way, right? I mean, your point is...
That's why the media is doing what you're saying. They're exaggerating these stories and confusing everyone to the point where they don't know whether it's up or down.
And as I said, it's like, we will make the West so corrupt that it stinks. I carry that line with me from the Frankfurt School, the Munzenberg, but your faith is that we can save the West, and we got to adopt an attitude that will take us in that direction. Is that correct?
Not only that, but my position is, my God, what a great position we're in. Look at the strategic advantages that America has. Look at the strategic advantages that Russia has. The white race between Russia and America controls almost all of the nuclear weapons in the world. That's one of the themes of my book, E equals MC squared and the Jewish Agenda, is that they pitted us against one another. But if we were to ally with each other, we could preserve ourselves forever and eliminate nuclear weapons from all of our enemies. We control all of the food production in the world. We can control all of the other races and all of the other territories, and we're in a wonderful position to do it. The dollar is the standard international currency, and you have the libertarians and the communists constantly attacking the dollar and promoting the idea of BRICS to undermine us. But we are in a wonderful position if we simply hold on to what we have instead of giving it away out of altruism and self-hatred. So what we have to do is make people aware of how wonderful these things are that we have so that we don't voluntarily give them up. We should not be promoting secessionist movements. We should be saying, look at how great America is. From coast to coast, it's beautiful. It has great food production. It has energy production. It has great people, great minds, great infrastructure, great industry, and we have to build those up. By causing us to hate all of those, we enabled the communists to transfer our production to China.
But hasn't Trump...
And they did the same thing to the English long ago. The socialists made the English think that they were child exploiters and that their industry was horrible and that they had to destroy their industry in order to save themselves. And they had to give up all of their colonies out of altruism so that they would then be good Christians. And in the process, they themselves destroyed their own empire.
But Trump surely has become a carrier of that intention of America first, and let's bring back the jobs. Let's make sure that all of this...
He's a carrier of the message.
Yeah.
But he commandeered that message from us. And he is now reneging on all of those promises. Kushner was over in China making deals to profit off of that. And right away, Trump backed off of China. Trump is also agitating with North Korea to set up a nuclear conflict. Now, North Korea, as I point out in the book, was created by the Soviet Union. Kim Il-sung was, I think, a captain in the Soviet army, and it was the Russians who made him the leader of the new North Korea that they created, which would pit the Korean people against itself, as the communists often do. And isn't it ironic that now Trump is agitating for war with North Korea, and Trump's presidency was engineered in Russia, and North Korea was engineered in Russia. And this is going to stratify and destroy our relationships with China, Taiwan, and South Korea, because we are going to be seen as instigating a war that no one wants, when in fact we have every right to respond preemptively to North Korea's threats against us. And I suspect that it is the Russians who were behind this because they created all the forces which are now in play.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder if people will agree with you on this. And of course, they need to pick up the book to find out the details of this too. And obviously, for understandable reasons, people will be suspicious of mainstream sources. Is that your primary sources, or do you go behind the headlines to dig out this stuff to prove it to people?
My primary sources, I believe, are historical facts that are not in dispute.
No, I'm just thinking about, some of the issues of, the back end deals and the proof that, Russia was hacking the election and this kind of stuff. That's what I'm talking about.
My source for that is Trump. Trump has now said that Russia has hacked the election, that he was lying when he said it was a hoax, and that it was Obama who allowed it to happen. Okay, I agree with that. So why don't they prosecute Obama? Why don't they put him in jail? And there were many things that Obama did to benefit Russia. He allowed Russia to invade the Ukraine and to annex it. He did not call Putin a liar to his face when Putin said the little green men were not Russian forces. And he did nothing punitive to shut Russia down. When Russia annexed Crimea, NATO should have invoked Article 5 in defense of its agreement to defend Ukraine when it set up an agreement with Ukraine that if they surrendered their nuclear weapons, NATO would become their guardian. And what could have happened is that Turkey could have shut off all of Russia's access from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. And another thing that could have happened is the big banks could have shut Russia down immediately. And Obama had no leadership whatsoever to oppose Putin's invasion and annexation of Crimea. He should be put on trial for treason for that. He should also be put on trial for treason for colluding with the Russians to hack the 2016 election. But he's not. And where is the prosecution of Hillary Clinton that Trump promised?
Well, he's given up on so many things. What about the wall? What
I was
about
just
bringing
gonna
back?
say,
What about
you beat me to it.
Yeah. What about the jobs? I actually read the other day. I don't know if it's true. I hadn't confirmed it yet, but that more refugees so far up till this point is more in this term than what Obama led in this period. Right? He's actually continuing the program, but it's even worse than what Obama was doing. It's like.
And it's worse because these people now have diseases which are evolving constantly under these horrific social conditions that they live in to become resistant strains and lethal strains. And we're allowing these people in without vetting them medically. And we're setting ourselves up for some horrible epidemics and all other kinds of problems. And we're surrendering our national sovereignty. That's treason. He's committing treason, the same treason that Obama was committing. So why is the alt-right supporting Putin when Putin handed us Trump?
Well,
you cannot deny that they were promoting each other during the election. I mean, I saw it with my own eyes. I don't have to rely on mainstream media. And I was saying these things before the mainstream media was saying it.
I think
the mainstream media can also say things that are true. Just because the mainstream media says them doesn't make them true. But it is revealing of what their agenda is, because they're selective in what they reveal and they're selective in how they present it. And they never, ever present the fact that it is international Jewry which is behind these machinations, and neither does Putin.
I think after the strike on Syria, a lot of people in the genuine alt-right obviously immediately started to back out on Trump, and the consequent, falls of all the issues that he was supposed to deal with, which he hasn't, has caused a lot of people to back out. What about the Kushner
But that happened.
Connection?
I suspect that Russia wanted Trump to attack Syria because it benefited Russia in that it made it appear that Trump was no longer Russia's puppet, and perhaps had never been Russia's puppet. And that attack happened immediately after the dossier was released. And it took the dossier out of the news cycle and made it seem absurd. It may well have been the Russians who instigated the chemical attack. I don't believe Assad had any involvement in a chemical attack. It would be suicidal.
No, I don't believe
that
either.
Now, who had access to all those airports that were bombed and happened to have Russians at those airports that were bombed? Maybe it was the Russians who were hitting people with chemical weapons. But the alt-right will always and only blame the West. Now, that helped take that dossier, which was highly explosive. Mm-hmm. I mean, it made some very serious accusations, and not all of those accusations have been discredited. I think only a few names got confused, and that aspect of it was discredited.
Talk to us about Kushner and his position here, and what is he doing? I mean, I feel that he has definitely been the one who's pulling a lot of strings on the back end. What do you know of him?
If you want to know Jared Kushner, take a look at his father and what happened with his father's sister and her husband, and with an Israeli and the governor of New Jersey, and the relationship that Israeli had, the homosexual relationship that they had that brought down the governor of New Jersey. And Chris Christie was involved in the prosecution of Kushner's father. So we know that the Kushner family is very strongly Zionist. And Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump visited a shrine or the grave of Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Messiah of the Jews and the head of Chabad. So he is part of that Chabad cabal, together with Putin and Putin's rabbi, Beryl Lazar.
Yeah, there is again, our friend.
And why is Jared Kushner setting us up to be friendly with the Red Chinese and to invite Red Chinese into our country and invest their money here, buying up our country, when we should be fighting back against the Red Chinese, their co-option of our industry, and just simply tell them we're not going to pay you those debts because you obtained them through the corruption of our government. Bill Clinton was in bed with the Red Chinese and corrupted our government to provide the Red Chinese with our nuclear secrets and materials. And Bill Clinton allowed the Chinese into the, what was the Economic Organization? Trump even mentioned it, that Clinton allowed the Chinese to gain access to our markets.
Like NAFTA or something, or?
No, it wasn't. It had nothing to do with North American free trade.
Oh, okay,
It was, it'll probably come to me later.
Sure, yeah.
I'm sure it's very familiar to many people. It was a big deal, and Clinton and Gore had many scandals of how they were being corrupted by the Red Chinese. And during their presidency, there was big scandals about Chinese spies gaining our nuclear secrets and sending them over to China.
Yeah,
and Israel has sent Red China their espionage on our industries was infamous at the time. You don't hear anything about it anymore, but they used to come here and take tours and use little cameras to photograph.
They were just let in.
And they would smile and bow, and everybody would be polite because we're not racist. And they completely ripped us off. And the Chinese are the most racist people in the world after the Jews. And the Chinese think we're idiots. We're complete idiots to give everything away to them.
Yeah. Well, they were just visiting. They just wanted to see what we're doing. And it was a cultural exchange, right? That's what it was about.
That's what it was about, right?
We
exchanged and they got the culture.
Yeah, exactly. We got nothing. We got Chinese food. Some of the crappy restaurants, right? Serving dog meat. But yeah, so all of those processes. I mean, I remember Trump. He was talking about China. Let's crack down on it, like we're being screwed over, and all the things he said was true. Obviously, it was true. It is true.
That's why I'm saying we should seize on that momentum, and we're not doing it. We're instead sucking up to Putin, who's our enemy. We should be seizing on that momentum and glorifying ourselves and looking for our leadership among ourselves.
Yeah.
And we should not be destroying our military alliances, which are engineered to defend us from communism. We should be strengthening them and using them. We should use NATO to destroy the EU. England could invoke Article 5. Greece could invoke Article 5 and utilize military force because it can be proven that the EU is undermining the national sovereignty of its member states. Yeah, and definitely. It's communists who are doing it. And the charter of the NATO alliance is to defend member states from communism.
What do you think of cross-border cooperation and these kinds of issues that we also need? Because NATO is obviously one of those alliances that you're talking about. It's a military alliance between these different nations to work together to make sure that. And again, it's as always. It's nothing necessarily wrong with some of the institutions. It's just about the people that are inside of them. It's the leadership. It's the people who control them. That is the problem ultimately. And it's the same with our government. You could argue that it's just the same with the European Union too. If we had the right people in there, maybe it's nothing, it's not the end of the world because they would be able to run the organization in a way which is to the best interest of the people. That's what the most important thing at the end of the day.
And that's what the Constitution of the United States is engineered to do. And that's why I'm saying that the communists are trying to get us to reject our most important resources so that we have no means to fight back or to better ourselves. And not just the communists, Jews in general. They want us to look upon ourselves as bad and to reject our own resources and to hand them over to others. We have the best resources in the world, and one of those resources is the Constitution of the United States of America. And we should embrace it and celebrate it and forcefully impose it. All of the founding fathers were convinced of the idea that America would be a white nation and a sanctuary for Western civilization to enshrine our rights and our freedoms and to protect us and to provide us with a defensible territory where we could secure ourselves for our progeny and their rights and their ability to continue on Western civilization and the white race. And that has been completely circumvented by the Jews and completely upended. And they lie repeatedly and state the opposite, that American ideals are that we should have open borders and that the white race is privileged and needs to be destroyed.
Yeah.
That is the antithesis of what the Founding Fathers stood for. So why don't we go back to the Founding Fathers? Why are we looking at Nazism as if it's our salvation when we have Americanism as our entrenched heritage and our salvation?
What do you make of the heartland theory? And Mackinder, he was talking about the pivot area, which Russia, of course, historically has been in control of. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's this kind of aspect.
No, I'm not familiar with it.
Oh, okay. It's just an interesting. I mean, you've had many nations or many, I guess, empires that have tried to control the territory of Russia in the past, including, of course, Napoleon, including Germany and stuff like that. Just this issue that they have the backs against the ice, if you will. They control such a large area that has so much resources and gas and things like this, that it's been an area that many different empires have been trying to control. Mackinder, I think, goes through this, and it's kind of like one of the geopolitical kind of aspects, if you will. If you look at it from the point of view of history, then this has been the pivot area that you see on the screen there has been the most important to control, and that many of these Atlanticists, as they're called, meaning Britain and America, etc., have been trying to take control of this particular area. It's an interesting theory, because I think that's where a lot of the people are well versed in the alternative and the truth movement and stuff like this. They understand that this has been an important dynamic when it comes to NATO, for example, of why they have been trying to weaken Russia. It's to try to control this particular area. And so it's easy to get into that kind of debate of, well, this is what NATO is historically have been trying to do, and that's why we have to be against them, because they're doing something that ultimately is bad, right? They're doing something where they're trying to control it and take it over from another people, because obviously my beef is not with the Russian people. They're also in the squeeze here, as it were. They're being controlled by external forces, correct?
Yes, and NATO could be dismantled if communism and kleptocracy were dismantled, and if they weren't pointing nuclear bombs at my family. That is a very real and very active threat. Now, if Putin is trying to secure Russian territory, as he ought to as the leader of Russia, why is he allowing Chinese into Siberia to rape all of the assets of the Russian people in Siberia, their resources? Why is he falsely accusing NATO of consuming Russian resources as he allows the back door to be left open to China, who comes in and harvests timber and exploits Russia in all kinds of ways? He does it because he is not looking after Russian interests. He is looking after the interests of international communism.
Yeah. Yep, it's a very interesting take. So, Christopher, what else is in the book? If it's a major area that we haven't addressed yet, would you like to talk about, so people know what some of the other aspects is in the book as well, or maybe just tips for people before we round off for this time?
I think one of the important aspects of the book, and it was unfolding as I was writing it, were what was taking place in the elections in Europe, like the general election of 2017 in the United Kingdom, and the dynamic of how terrorism was used to cause Jeremy Corbyn to rise in the polls and Theresa May to fall in the polls. And how Theresa May used the terrorism to attack those rights which the Americans enshrined to protect whites, like the right to free speech and the right to due process of law before life or limb are taken from a white citizen. Theresa May exploited supposedly Islamic terrorism to erode our rights and to create animosity with Islam. Jeremy Corbyn attacked Theresa May on the basis that she was promoting EU-style austerity and had failed to defend Great Britain from Muslim attacks by not devoting enough resources to combating it, because she was doing it on the cheap. And when he started to send out that message and the terrorist attacks started to escalate, it resonated with the British people, and they turned against the incumbents and were looking for something new. And Jeremy Corbyn, prior to all that, had been very unpopular, is a Marxist, an ultra-leftist, and a pro-Putinist. And so I believe that Putin ordered ISIS attacks in Great Britain, and after the first one occurred, they were able to judge its effects, and they saw that it was harming Theresa May and benefiting Jeremy Corbyn and causing an astronomical rise in his popularity when the man is a ludicrous leader. He's essentially a communist.
All right, folks. Interesting. Definitely a different perspective than we've talked about it for in a while, at least. So if you want to find out more, definitely pick up a copy of the book, Putin's Reign of Terror. It's out now. It was released, just a couple of weeks ago, right? I believe.
Right.
And of course, you do have other books too. Give us some of the other titles that you have available, Christopher.
In a similar vein is my book, E=MC² and the Jewish Agenda. And in that book, I explore the idea that if the white race and Western civilization were to unite, we would control the vast majority of nuclear weapons in the world, as well as the vast majority of the food production in the world, and that we could then utilize our tremendous advantages as opposed to rejecting them for our own self-interests, and that we ought to promote our own heritage and our own advantages instead of rejecting them and looking to foreign ideologies and foreign saviors who are our enemies. And I also detail in that book all of the Jewish messianic prophecies which can be fulfilled through the use of nuclear weaponry, and that the Jews have a schedule at which they intend to bring about the end of the world. And that relates, I think we discussed it last time, to the Anno Lucis calendar and the mythologies that the Jews have, that there are 7 days to creation, and that the 6,000 years of the initial creation has expired, and that they want to instigate the Messianic era in the 7th millennium, the Sabbath millennium, in which the world will rest and enjoy peace under the Jewish Messiah. And I provide all of the rabbinical and Judaic sources for all of that information. I quote several rabbis who say exactly that in the year 2000, there has to be the beginning of the Messianic age, and the Gentiles have to be exterminated.
I'm convinced that they're going to pose like someone like Kushner as the Messiah. I know. Do you know that he's living on 666 Avenue, Park Avenue?
No, I didn't know.
It's true. It's really true. Yeah, it's amazing.
I wonder how that happened, man.
Yeah,
I wonder if he picked it or it was pure coincidence.
Yeah, exactly. Just a coincidence. Don't worry about it. No, but seriously, we should. I definitely want to have you back. I know that you wanted to address this issue about Putin, and I think it's a really important perspective to add to the pile of everything else we're talking about. And because I get it. I get your point in terms of the gullibleness in just taking this position because it's easy because of the situation that we're in. So that this has been
because people are so confused that this is presented to them in a way that makes sense, and everything else is presented to them in a way that doesn't make sense. So they accept it on that basis instead of on a rational basis.
Right. So definitely, I do want to have you back though, because I do want to talk more about Einstein, and we can just address this series a little bit. But it'd be great talking about E=MC², your new book on that at some point. So we can discuss that later, Christopher. But thank you for coming on today and for spending some time with us. Really appreciate it. Keep up the good work, Christopher.
Thank you so much. I know you're going to take some heat for this, and all kinds of accusations are going to be leveled against you as a result. So I want to make clear that these are my views and not your views. And I appreciate your admiration of the First Amendment and allowing me to express what I believe, even if you disagree with it.
You got it. Exactly. That's what this show always has been about and always going to be about. Let's bring on different viewpoints and get it all out on the table. So thank you, Christopher. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Well, guys, before we wrap up here, just want to share some of my thoughts before we terminate the show for this time. I don't agree with some of the conclusions Bjerknes has come to. I just don't see some of it. But I do see other aspects of it. I just will have to find out a bit more for myself, look deeper into some of his sources and research. Obviously, it's not a bad idea to have dissenting voices when everyone is looking in one direction. It's important that we have folks looking in the other direction to see what's going on. Obviously, we need to be skeptical about the mainstream. But also, and this I agree with the fast rising tide of the opposition to the mainstream. We know how both sides are played, and usually there is a core that controls the different wings of the beast. Now, what I find curious, though, in this case of the show is how some of the conclusions line right up with the mainstream. So, I do think it's important with dissenting voices, but sometimes it almost seems that they're just coming around on themselves, and we have, in a weird kind of way, people lining up with the mainstream. But, just from my own point of view, I frankly don't know who Putin is, what his agenda is, or who controls him. We don't know much about the inner mechanics of Russian politics. At least I don't. We don't know who pulled the strings behind the scenes, or even out in the open for that matter, and what ideology Putin really believes in versus what he's pushing, etc., or what he says, right? We shouldn't take any politician's word at face value, obviously. I mean, Putin is a smart statesman, and he would probably not deny himself taking benefit from playing a role that's favorable to the rising tide of opposition in America. I think what Christopher does here is to argue that we can just not look at the first level to things. We have to go a bit deeper. We have to understand that some of these guys, they are 4 or 5 levels down, or 4 or 5 moves ahead, if you prefer that term. So Bjerknes is asking us to think about who we are defending and who we are aligning ourselves with. I think that's a wise attitude and a point well made. Think, look, and also try to figure out how this might play out in the future. That's great. We need these kinds of strategies. I also know, though, that some of the Russian or pro-Russian and pro-Trump trolling that we've seen from the alt-right, from more, extreme and famous voices to some of the more unknown and alt-right characters too, much of that has been about poking fun at it all and simply making the mainstream paranoid to try to get them triggered. For example, I know that Lana has put Russia or, Russian on her Twitter account as a way to kind of get some of the mainstream journalists, pick up on this as proof that she's in on it or a spy or something like that, which is obviously ridiculous. It's not true, but it gets the mainstream prostitutes in the media all rustled. And we like that. It's fun. We need to get them out of balance from their position. And I think, if I'm just being frank here, that Chris might not understand some of the nuances of this kind of rhetoric or counterculture affinity to Putin and to Trump. I mean, it's not serious. To some it might be, sure, but I mean, this is on par with calling Trump the God Emperor. I mean, no one thinks that he's God or an emperor, and I mean, many look at Putin the same way. They know he's not a savior. It's just fun to take this position because so many in the West and in the corrupt media establishment seem to loathe Russia these days. So, we have this position, if they hate Russia and Putin, they must be doing something right. I don't know. I mean, sometimes our enemies aren't our friends. We just have to keep that in mind. So, guys, just before we wrap up here, I just want to let you know as well, we have a live stream from Oslo planned for Saturday, July 1st. It's going to begin at 3 p.m. Central European Time. That's 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, US. It's a Skanza forum. We have some speakers lined up there for you. We're going to try to bring this live to you. Then on Sunday, we have Weekend Warrior, our live TV show, only for members as usual. We put it on Sunday this weekend due to the other live stream collision that was occurring there. Anyway, more info about this at redicemembers.com and also on redice.tv. Thank you for listening, members. We love you guys. Thank you for being a member, sustaining your membership with us. You ensure that we can continue to bring you shows like this and everything else that we do. Thank you guys. Have a great day wherever you are. We'll talk soon.